Go, John.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to go. So this started off lousy, but in many ways, that's not unlike the life and times, unfortunately, of our protagonist here, Frederick Benteen. You know, when I began researching this back in 2018, I was surprised at a lot of what I learned and a lot of some of the stuff that I thought I knew, you know, about him. You know, he's a widely known, regularly misunderstood, often maligned, and patently tragic figure in American military history. His undeserved reputation precedes him in most discussions surrounding the infamous military operation that he found himself a part of. But obviously, it's another aspect of his life, his influence and involvement in baseball, of course, that leads us to further explore Frederick Benteen here tonight. So the Benteens originated in Baltimore, Maryland, and ended up in Petersburg, Virginia, where Frederick was born in 1834. His mother died when he was 7 years old, and his father, Theodore, subsequently remarried and moved the family west to St. Louis in 1849. By 1856, the elder Benteen had became well established in the area of paint and glass supply, and his strapping 16-year-old son, who loved fishing and was very athletic, began working in the family business. The elder Benteen ensured Frederick a proper education, and that's the first time where he encountered any military drill, was when he took that at school. Now, by the mid-1850s, we all know that Missouri was a hotbed of political unrest, and the 1860 election further complicated matters there. Tensions in that area were mirrored in Benteen's own life. His father was an ardent secessionist, while his girlfriend, Catherine, was a vehement unionist and abolitionist. And this tug and pull would be repeated throughout his life. So while factions and families began to take sides along political, social, and economic lines in St. Louis, Benteen himself took to a new side of his own, joining on with the Cyclone baseball team. Bob, if you could advance that. So, as was often the case in the cities of the North and Northeast, members of the young upper middle class would engage in recreational outdoor activities. This was the case as well for the folks in that demographic in St. Louis. Through his work in the glass and supply and hardware business, Benteen surely became familiar with the other young gentleman merchants, particularly in that area, that genre of business. Two of these young men listed in the 1860 St. Louis directory as working for the Missouri Glass Company were Edward Burdell and Merritt Griswold. So to understand Benteen's involvement in baseball, his early involvement in baseball, we have to talk a little bit about Burdell and Griswold. Bob, if you could advance it. So the younger Burdell came from a very well-to-do St. Louis family, but he was educated in the Northeast and very likely was exposed to the game of baseball at that time. Merritt Griswold was born in New York in 1835, resided in Brooklyn, and we know that he played with baseball in the Putnam Club in '57 and with the Hiawatha Club in 1858 and '59. An engineer by trade, he moved to St. Louis sometime in 1859, moved in with an aunt, and he found work at the St. Louis Glass Works, which was opened by Edward Burdell Sr. in May of 1859. So the younger Burdell was the business manager, and obviously from what what happened next, we can assume he became well acquainted with the firm's new employee, Merritt Griswold. So there's some uncertainty as to, and this is a presentation and discussion for a different day. Well, there's some uncertainty as to the actual date of the co-founding of the Cyclone Baseball Club. We know that Burdell and Griswold were the co-founders and did form the club sometime in spring or summer of 1859. Next slide. So here's an excerpt from it. The Missouri Democrat in April of 1860, and it's an article and diagram that Merritt Griswold himself sent in. Griswold makes claim to being the Cyclones being the first organized club in St. Louis in 1859, and there's significant merit to that claim. His letter and diagram were published in the Democrat in 1860. And, regardless of whether or not the Cyclones were really the first organized club in St. Louis, as there were a few that seemed to lay title, we do know that Frederick Benteen was a member of this club in 1860. Next slide, Bob. In fact, he was more than just a member. Here we see in an article from the Missouri Republican in March of 1861, we're highlighted down there. He was, in fact, the vice president of the Cyclone Baseball Club by 1861. And there we see on the right an image of Lafayette Square Park, where the Cyclone Baseball Club, at the old grounds, although they had only been there for about a year, where the Cyclone Baseball Club would get together and play. And of course, if it's a little difficult to see, but we do see the Griswold, we do see Griswold and Burdell as well listed in that article as still being members of the Cyclone Baseball Club, if not officers. Next slide, Bob. So we now know that Frederick Benteen is playing baseball with the Cyclone Baseball Club of St. Louis as early as 1860. Here we see from the Missouri Republican in May of 1861, an article about the married versus single men game being played. Players from the Commercial, Cyclone, Morningstar clubs all playing at Lafayette Park, splitting sides and playing at the park. And on the right, we see the married club listed at the top and the singles club listed at the bottom. Much of what we know about early St. Louis baseball comes from Edmund Tobias and his history that was put in the Sporting News in 1895 and 1896. And he wasn't just writing about it later on. He himself was very much involved in the baseball landscape at that time. We see Tobias's name there listed under the married club. And we see Frederick Benteen of the Cyclone Club listed under there as one of the singles. So as the Civil War began in April of 1861, this contest was likely one of the last 2 or 3 games that Benteen would participate in as a member of the Cyclones. Next slide, Bob. On the left there, we see a bigger diagram of where I got that smaller excerpt of Lafayette Park. Around the park there, we see the residences, listed by name of those individuals, in the area. So the Cyclone Baseball Club, of which Benteen was a part, was playing in Edward Burdell's front yard. His father started the glassworks where Griswold and Burdell met. They co-founded the club. Benteen joined, and they were playing right there in his front yard. One of the things we know about Burdell, and if you take a look closely at that map on the left there, there's 2 shaded properties. The 2 properties that are shaded and circled, they were actually listed as Confederate sympathizers and secessionists. And of course, Burdell's property there in the upper left-hand corner was one of them. Again, Missouri being very deeply divided over the issues fueling the impending war, Cyclone Baseball Club being significantly impacted by them, to include the fields they played upon. And as we'll see here in the next slide, the way in which this team started to break up over the conflict. As local volunteer militias began drilling on the baseball fields, some even during the conduct of baseball games. There's some articles about baseball teams being chased off the fields by local militias. The political differences arose between team members. I mean, we saw it within Benteen's own family, and we'll continue to see it, but it also arose between team members. Burdell himself, the founding or co-founding member of the Cyclone Baseball Club, enlisted in the Confederate Army, would fight with Colonel John Mosby's Raiders and was killed in 1864. The other co-founder, Merritt Griswold, remained loyal to the Union and joined the 3rd Regiment U.S. Reserve Corps, the Missouri Home Guard. Every single member of this club would take up arms with one side or the other. Then when I say the club, I mean the Cyclone Baseball Club. That would include Benteen. He would defy the wishes of his secessionist father, and he joined the 1st Battalion Missouri Cavalry in September of 1861. And rather unfortunately, his father remarked to him that when he left for to join the Union Army, he hoped that the first bullet fired kills him, and he hoped that it was fired by a Benteen that remained loyal to the cause. So, Benteen had a besides his baseball playing, which I'm certain was a bright spot, and we'll revisit that throughout this presentation. He certainly had a very challenging childhood and adolescence and young adulthood, given the family issues, and then of course the national issues that he was now very much a part of. Next slide, Bob.
Hold on, it's not advancing. There you go.
Okay. So like we said, Benteen would join the 1st Battalion Missouri Cavalry. He would serve in the Union Army from 1861 to 1864. You can see there the different units that he served with during that period of time, along with the battles that he participated in, to include the Siege of Vicksburg. In recognition of his gallantry in action, Benteen was twice breveted to the rank of colonel. At war's end, Benteen remained in federal service and was issued a regular Army commission. He was then assigned to a Western post, first with the 138th U.S. Colored Volunteers, and then with the 7th U.S. Cavalry. Now, there is no record of Benteen's involvement with baseball during the war, but was it likely that he or his unit participated? I would say certainly yes, so. So where does the trail pick up again in terms of Frederick Benteen and baseball? Well, that's going to be in 1868. The first official record of a baseball game comprised of men from Benteen's command was in Kansas in August of 1868. In a journal entry amongst his personal papers at the Rare Book and Manuscript Library at University of Georgia, Benteen recounts the event that took place at the South Solomon River at Wichita. And that's a current day image of the area where this baseball game that we're going to see recounted here took place. If you'd advance it one, Bob. So here we see Benteen's recountenance of the events of 1868. I will just read the highlighted portion for everyone. On his arrival, the 9 of his troop, and his being Colonel West, were challenged by the 9 of mine for the baseball championship of Solomon Forks, a series of 3 games, losers to set up the liquids when we got to where it was going to be had. They picketed the adjacent country well, and with our equipment on the ground, as well as bats, bases, and balls, we proceeded to business. West being the captain of his 9, I of mine. Colonel West was outclassed. For my 9 walked off with 2 consecutive wins, and West was willing to give in that he was not in it. I haven't a sound finger left on either of my hands resulting from playing baseball. I was a devotee then, but I am not now. Now, that it's somewhat interesting. We don't know exactly who participated in the game, other than a team of 9s from each unit. But the way Benteen talks about it, it sounds possible, if not likely, that he participated in the game himself, which would not be out of character given Benteen's history, but somewhat out of character for military officers at that time fraternizing or joining in with games that surely involved enlisted men. But the important thing we know here is that Benteen was back to baseball by the summer of 1868. Now, he remained in a number of command of different battalions in the 7th Cavalry into the 1870s. We know what units these were, and we know where they were stationed. What we know about their baseball activities, however, can be very much attributed to the next man, to whom we owe this history, and to whom I owe most of this presentation, as he was the one who really gathered it for us to find back at the time. So, Bob, if you would advance it one more. What we know of the baseball playing Benteens and baseball in the 7th Cavalry in general, we really attribute to the diary of August Theodore Ewart. Baseball in the Black Hills in 1874 was the book that was put together and really just chronicles his diary entries. This was a German immigrant who joined the Union Army himself at the age of 14 in 1861, rose to the rank of lieutenant by 1864, mustered out as the kind of the more colloquial term for being charged with drunkenness and gambling with enlisted men. He would re-enter the military as a private in H Company in the 7th Cavalry of 1867, H Company being the company that Frederick Benteen commanded. He was the trumpeter for H Company. He was the secretary of the Benteen 9 Baseball Club in 1875 to 1876. He mustered out of the 7th Cavalry in 1876, which is very likely why we have a lot of these journal entries. We'll get to that a little bit later. He served as the Adjutant General of Illinois in the 1890s and died in 1906. Before we get into exactly what he wrote about, I think it's interesting to note the cover of the book that was put together in the 1970s. I guess it was his writings about the baseball games played in the Black Hills in 1874 were significant enough to be the cover art for that work. Next slide, Bob, please. So yes, so we have baseball in the Black Hills in 1874. Before the baseball games were played, we had to get to the Black Hills in 1874, and we do this by 10 companies of the 7th Cavalry departing Fort Lincoln on July 2nd, 1874. The column was led by the 7th Cavalry's regimental commander, who at this time now was Lieutenant General George Armstrong Custer. Their mission was to identify suitable locations for forts and whether or not gold mining operations can be conducted. To this point in history, it was the most well photographed and chronicled military operation to that point in history, photographed by an Englishman named William Illingsworth. The campaign lasted till August 30th, so almost 2 months, at which time the 7th Cavalry would return to Fort Lincoln. 2 of the units involved in this Black Hills expedition were H Company and L Company of the 7th Cavalry. These units played a series of baseball games during the campaign. If you would flip for me there, Bob. So a little bit of background. While I'm talking, you can take a look at the pictures there on the left. That's an image of Fort Lincoln in the 1870s, and a present day image of Fort Lincoln. You can see from the air there why it was probably a very good spot for baseball games to be held. So troopers of Company H of the 7th Cavalry comprised the entire membership of the Benteen 9, the Benteen 9 Baseball Club. There were 54 members in all on the Benteen Baseball and Gymnasium Club. Men of Company L made up the roster of the Actives Baseball Club. Now, Company H was previously stationed at Nashville, Tennessee, and Fort Rice prior to joining the balance of the 7th Cavalry at Fort Lincoln for this particular expedition. And like I said, Fort Lincoln offered troopers, obvious ample space to hold these matches. While we'll kind of come back around to this in a little bit, so you do know, just in terms of timeline, the Benteen 9 itself, as a team, was initially formed in Nashville, Tennessee, in 1873 during an assignment where they were basically sent to provide security for reconstruction efforts in Tennessee. So the team actually came about at that time, and played baseball games in 1873, and of course now we're going to talk about the games played in the Black Hills in 1874. And these games played in the Black Hills in Dakota Territory in 1874 are the first recorded games in the Dakota Territory, ever. So we're looking at kind of a trailblazing moment here for the Dakota Territory in terms of the sport. So the first game recorded in the Black Hills was played in end of July 1874 between the Actives of L Company and the Benteens of H Company. Aside from the actual box score, which we'll see in a minute, here's what Ewart said about the contest. Ewart, just as a quick aside, and we'll see it again a little bit later on, was quite the writer, very colorful, and very much mirrored a lot of the baseball writing that we see, even from the Northeast at this time. Very colorful, very detailed, not often flattering, but always very interesting. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just let you know that, of course, there was an issue with the umpire who favored the Fort Lincoln team, which was the Actives. They favored the home team to the extent that it was evident to every spectator on the ground. Now, just so you know, historically there was always a rift between Benteen and Custer. So Benteen's H Company team was certainly not the favored group of Custer and the balance of the command. So Custer's favorite team happened to be the actives of L Company, who won this contest. We see that the best playing in this game was done by Rafter, who is their catcher, where he was very adept in taking McCurry's swift ones with unerring precision. Nearly the entire command was there on the improvised field to witness this first game of baseball ever played in the Black Hills. So, what I surmise from that is that, Benteen, obviously, but Custer, as well as, Major Keogh, Custer's brothers, the entire command structure of the 7th Cavalry was there to watch these affairs, and at least there for the taking in this first game. If you would advance me one, Bob. Now, I was going through the photographs that William Illingsworth, the English photographer, took of the Black Hills campaign. And this here is an image of the site of the 1874 encampment. If you were to take the entire cover of that the Black Hills book, expedition book, and spread it out, on the left-hand side, you would see these rocks and pines on the left-hand side. So I can't say for sure that it's the exact location that sketched baseball game was played, but it's very, very possible. In fact, it's very likely that somewhere in this image during the term of this encampment, the 2 baseball games in question in 1874 took place. So I thought that was a pretty neat image, and we can imagine two teams, the Actives and the Benteens, taking up sides and playing their 2 games here in 1874. Next slide, please, Bob.
I'm starting to have some trouble with the slides. Please go on with the talk. I'll try to fix it.
Okay, as Bob moves through there, and I'm certain that he will. The next slide, we'll see there's kind of a blow up of the sketch game of between the Actives and the Benteens, as well as the box score that made it into the Bismarck Tribune in September of 1874. No doubt, by that was the work of Private Ewart, who was the writer, the scribe, kept the diary, and was the secretary of the baseball club. It's interesting that he says the game took place in Custer's Park, which obviously was I guess his own creation, because obviously the field being completely improvised was anything but a park, but certainly a field, truly a field of fields, actually. So maybe we'll circle back around to that. I just thought the box score was interesting, and it gets us to the second game played this time on August 11th of 1874. The Actives and Benteens played the second game of their games today. Ewart talks about the weather and how splendid it was. He mentions that this game was worthy of professional clubs, which is interesting. It was a closely contested contest between Frederick Benteen's 9 and the Actives. The Benteens won 17-10. Again, he mentions some of the players of the game. McCourt, again, of H Company, playing first base. McCurry and Rafter are mentioned in this. McCourt is mentioned because he received a red-hot one, right square in the eye, from McCurry. Of course, Ewart mentions in the article that he should have caught the ball with his hands rather than his eyeball. But that is, his friends advising him to give up playing for the day. This, however, he refused to do, tying a handkerchief over the injured eye and playing the remainder of the game in right field rather than first base. The playing par excellence for this day, Ewart mentions, was done again by the pitcher McCurry and Rafter the catcher. And he mentions the game being an excellent one for amateur players and deserves a much better record. Bob, if you could just back it up a couple slides, kind of go in reverse. And one more, and one more. Okay, yep, right there. So again, there's that, one more, forward. So there's the box score from the Bismarck Tribune in September of 1874. Again, a close-up of the sketch, the cover art for the book that came out, the diary that came out in 1874. Again, significant, the game is being significant enough. Again, the expedition was a very important military expedition. There was a lot in there, about in terms of exploration of the Black Hills, whether or not it was going to be viable for forts, the mining issues, and the fact that the baseball games made the cover of it, I find pretty interesting. So thank you, Bob, for doing that. Advance it at least one. There's the write-up from the second of the three games between the Benteens and the actives played out in the field during the expedition. So we know there was a third game. This third game, the deciding game, the championship game, best of three, was held back at Fort Lincoln once the units returned. And that game, the deciding championship game, was won by the Benteens by a score of 24-10. So Bob, if you can advance it one more, that'd be great. So as important as Theodore Ewart's diary was and is to our understanding of the Bentine Nine and the baseball playing, being done in the 7th Cavalry at this time, his newspaper article here in the Press and Dakotian Daily from 1876 is probably even more detailed and more important. So Ewart chronicles the establishment of the club in 1873 in this article. I mean, he goes into the record keeping in terms of the equipment ordered and used by the players, providing the results of all their games, all the locations, all their scores, and along with very colorful and descriptive bios of each of the players, some flattering, some not so much. In this newspaper article of 1876. So Bob, if you could advance it maybe one more. Thank you. When you take a look at it, I'll just highlight some of the important parts there. We know that in March of 1873, H Company of the 7th Cavalry organized the Benteen Baseball Club in Nashville, Tennessee, in honor of the company commander, Frederick W. Benteen. During this time, they purchased 1.5 dozen baseball bats and 1 dozen balls for their use. And we see that, interestingly, he mentions on the right-hand side of the page here, by continuous and strenuous effort, the baseball club practiced regularly and exercised till the captain of the club, Joseph McCurry, who was the pitcher and also the company first sergeant, believed us able to compete with the average amateur nines then in vogue. And they did get together with a number of the amateur nines to play throughout from 1873 through 1875. Next slide, Bob. Here are just some brief snippets on the players. We already talked a little bit about from the Ewart's diary, the write-ups from the first 2 games in the Dakota Territory. We know Rafter was the catcher and very, very good. Joseph McCurry, the pitcher, was also the company first sergeant. And we know that he was the best player on the team, according to Ewart. And I found this interesting. He leaves the Army next winter and will no doubt be engaged in some professional or first-class amateur nine in the East in 1877. McCurry was from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As we move along, we learned a little bit about another of the team's standouts, our second baseman, William Williams, Private William Fatty Williams, reliable and swift, good player. He too is from Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, in fact. Found this very interesting from the 1876 article that Ewart says he was signed papers to play baseball in 1877. I looked into this as far as I could and as much as I could, and I'm still looking into it. I don't know with whom, but possibly if it was in Pittsburgh and it was going to be in 1877, I don't know how many other options there might have been other than the Pittsburgh Allegheny of the International Association. I don't know. As we'll come to find out, that never came to pass for a very obvious reason. But it's interesting to note that that is the only image of any of the Bentine Nine that I was able to find. Of course, other than Frederick Benteen himself, this image of Private William Williams, was the only other image of one of the team members I was able to find. Next slide, Bob. We have a couple more players here. We have the Bishops, Alex and Charles, who were not related, who had pretty good player reputations. One was from Brooklyn, other from Washington, D.C. We have Peter McCourt, the first baseman, who's took the red hot one off the face from McCurry in the second game in the Black Hills. And our right fielder, Alonzo Plum. Interestingly enough, Plum, aside from being the right fielder, was also mentioned in other 7th Cavalry texts in diaries and writings about being the comedian of the regiment. He was the jokester. He liked to sing and play jokes, and very well liked and regarded by everyone. And he happened to be the right fielder on the Benteen 9. Next slide, Bob. Here we have a small excerpt about the heavy-hitting James Curley, who leaves the service this spring, which is probably a good thing for James Curley. And our substitutes, James Nichols, Mathis, McPeak, and Gilbert. So these were substitutes and part-time players who were mentioned in the article, and their names can be seen in the box scores as well. The last individual that comes up in Ewart's writing is William Davis, the third baseman from Porkopolis. He obviously, you can read that. It was not a very flattering, assessment of his baseball playing skills. And he happened to actually be a member of a different company, one of the few that was a member of a different company than H Company, while a member of the Bentine 9. He was in Company E, Echo Company. So how well did all these ball-playing troopers fare, in terms of baseball on the Bentine 9 between 1873 and 1875? Next slide, Bob. Well, they played a total of 17 recording games between their establishment in Tennessee in 73 and the spring of 1875. They played in Tennessee, they played in Kentucky, they played in Louisiana, and of course in the Dakota territories. It seems like they would play just about anybody that would agree to play them, whether it was the actives, other military teams, local teams, or pick nines from other military teams or the local population. They played to a record of 12 wins and 4 losses and 1 tie. The Bentine 9 played their final game, a win versus a team of locals in the Dakota Territory in 1875. And we're going to see here in just a second why, in fact, that was the last time they took the field together. The men who comprised the Bentine 9 spent the entire winter of 1875 encamped with the balance of the 7th Cavalry at Fort Abraham Lincoln in North Dakota. Next slide, Bob. So I just threw this in here because in terms of thinking about this presentation and what was going on in the country at the time, what was going on in the country and what was going on in baseball, we really do have beginnings and endings here in the spring of 1876. It was a landmark season for the national pastime, with the establishment and play of the National League in the spring of 1876. In the spring of 1876 also marked another less favorable date on the calendar for the 7th Cavalry and the Bentine 9. Bob, if you would, next slide. So in April of 76, while at the very same time play in the newly established National League is beginning back east, the men of the 7th U.S. Cavalry are preparing for another spring and summer campaign. On the 17th of May, 12 companies under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer sent out from Fort Lincoln. Their mission this time, different than the 1874 Black Hills expedition. This time it was more in force. Forcing the Lakota Sioux and the Cheyenne back to their reservations. Next slide, Bob. And of course, I think we, to varying degrees, we all are aware of what happened next to these folks. On the June 25th, 1876, Bentine's H Company, to include the majority of the members of his baseball team, advanced to a position on what become known as the Reno-Bentine Battlefield or Reno Hill. Despite repeated attacks from a numerically superior enemy, Bentine's men held their ground until late morning of the next day on the 26th. The entirety of Custer's column that rode with Custer further down the valley was overrun and killed. I mentioned earlier that Custer, I guess, favored L Company certainly over Bentine's H Company in terms of the ball club, in terms of watching them and supporting them. Well, L Company happened to ride with Custer's column, and all members of the Actives Baseball Club of L Company were killed in action that day. So 12 total companies, 5 companies rode with Custer, 3 companies under the command of Benteen, to include his own company, obviously, Company H, which comprised the men of the Benteen Nine. The next slide here, I don't want to get too much into it, but in case you were interested, it shows a little bit about where Benteen and his men, to include the members of the Benteen Baseball Club, ended up versus Custer, his column, and the men of the Actives Baseball Club of Company L. So to the right of that diagram, which would be to the east, would be the area where we see labeled as the Reno-Benteen Battlefield, or Reno Hill. And of course, further there to the left or to the west, southwest, would be the Custer Battlefield, and the area of the last stand, where approximately 210 men of the 7th Cavalry, to include, again, the Actives baseball team of L Company, perished with Colonel Custer. Next slide, Bob. These are the actual casualty lists. There we see H Company on the left. The Benteen Baseball Club suffered 4 members wounded in action and 2 members killed in action. That would be Davis and Gilbert. And so we see on that list there, every member listed on the left was wounded. These are H Company casualties wounded. We see McCurry, who was the captain of the baseball club, the best player and their pitcher. We see both the Bishops, and we see William C. Williams, the individual who was signed to play in Pittsburgh in 1877, was also wounded. There on the right, this is the L Company casualties, not wounded in action, but killed in action. So it was the entirety of the company. And if we were to go back and look at some of the box scores of those games played between the Benteens and the Actives in 1874, we would see a number of those names listed there. Next slide, please, Bob. So again, just this kind of some juxtaposition. On Monday, the 26th of June, 1876, right around the same time that the fledgling National League's Hartford Dark Blues wrapped up a win versus the Louisville Grays, the survivors of the 7th U.S. Cavalry, including members of the Benteen Nine, began to secure and bury their dead, generally right in place at the time. And as we'll come to see here in just a minute, that was a very daunting task given the disposition of some of the bodies. Next slide, Bob. So I'll let you just take a second and look at that. We can certainly go back to this, and if anybody's really interested, I can get these slides. Oh, Bob's got the slides. We can get them out to everyone. This just happens to be the post-battle disposition of each of the members of the Benteen Nine. A number of them, like I said, were wounded. McCurry, the Bishops, Williams, they were wounded in action. Davis and Gilbert, they were killed in action. But a number of them either mustered out of service shortly before the battle took place, or made it, survived the battle up at the Reno, up on Reno Hill when Benteen's column came and reinforced and supported Reno's retreat and made their stand at Reno Hill. So a number of these individuals did survive the battle as well. So the next page, Bob. This has the balance of the team. Davis, the third baseman, Curley, the heavy hitter. We see our substitute players there. William Gilbert, who was killed in action, and of course the last player I mentioned there, because he is worth reading, as he was the one player mentioned to have a bit of a future in baseball, was William C. Fatty Williams, the second baseman. He was wounded in the leg. He eventually left service, he married, had a bunch of kids, and eventually returned to the Virginia area, where from looking into it, it's possible that he might have resumed baseball activities. There was an article in 1899 out of Norfolk where he was managing a team, but it talked about how he was still very swift and fleet of foot, which was, if we went back a couple slides, we would see that is exactly the way Ewart described him. He died in Norfolk, Virginia in 1919. So that's the disposition of the players. What of Frederick Benteen himself? Well, following the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Benteen remained in the military and remained with the 7th Cavalry. He continued on to participate with distinction in the Battle of Canyon Creek during the Nez Perce War of 1877. In 1879, he was called to testify at the Reno court-martial, the Court of Inquiry, at which Reno was being court-martialed for his actions at the Little Bighorn. Benteen served in various billets from 1880 to 1881, promoted to the rank of major in the 9th U.S. Cavalry, which is the Buffalo Soldiers, in 1882. The 9th U.S. Cavalry was a very well-organized, well-performing, and very active unit in 1883. However, Benteen's advancing age and deteriorating mood began to catch up with him, and he rarely set out for actions in the field with the unit. However, as the senior major of the 9th Cavalry in Utah in 1885, we have one last record of baseball being played, baseball playing being done in the ranks of a Benteen commanded unit. So we see here the white infantrymen and black cavalrymen at the fort fraternized without any fine discrimination as to color. Ate together, slept together, fought together. The only problem, it seems, between the white and black soldiers and the 9th U.S. Cavalry at this time seemed to occur at, of course, baseball games. The Buffalo Soldiers were tremendous baseball players, usually winning most of the games. Many of them were exceptionally good boxers, too. Fistfights between the black and white soldiers over bad caused by the umpires are mentioned in several newspaper stories. This is, of course, a good fistfight relieves some of the dull monotony of garrison duty. And many members of the 21st Infantry, who were Irishmen, also stationed there at Fort Duquesne in Utah, loved a good Donnybrook among themselves with blacks, whites, or anybody who was in the mood. So this is kind of where the trail ends in terms of Benteen either sponsoring, being aware of, influencing, baseball being played within the ranks of his troopers. And this is now in 1885. Next slide, Bob. At this time, and I don't want to really say at this time, Benteen, if you look back at Benteen, if someone was to kind of do a forensic study of Benteen, maybe even before the Civil War, but certainly after the Civil War and after the Little Bighorn, he began to deteriorate in a number of different ways. During his time at Fort Duquesne, he began to become very temperamental, and his command presence seemed to wane. In 1886, he found himself embroiled in discourse with just about everybody, his soldiers, the local marshal, the Mormon community, government appointees, and one very unfortunate one that had close associations to General Crook. Benteen's drinking began to intensify, and when he found himself on the wrong side of General Crook because of this issue with the government appointee, it was finally then he was charged with multiple counts of drunkenness and fitness for duty infractions that over time had been overlooked because of his prior service, because of the relationships he made. It was kind of brushed under the carpet, but at this point in time, it couldn't be. He was courts-martialed in 1887, found guilty and sentenced to a dismissal from service. But because of those reputations that he had forged over 30 plus years of service, he was with some very, very high, with the general, the General Shermans, the General Sheridans, these types. He was afforded the opportunity to retire with full benefits, which he did in 1888. He retired to Atlanta, Georgia, where in 1890 he was notified by the U.S. Senate his military rank was being raised to the rank of Brevet Brigadier General for his gallantry in action during the battles of the Little Bighorn and Canyon Creek. Following a bout of paralysis, Benteen passed away on June 22nd, 1898. Bob, if you could just advance it one more, that'll be the last slide, and I'll just kind of sum up here. Benteen lost his mother when he was 7 years old, basically disowned by his father when he was 24. Everybody he became, I'm assuming he became close with when he was 24, 25 years old, playing baseball in the Cyclone Baseball Club, disbanded because of the Civil War. Some of them were killed in action. He lost his first child to an illness. He and Catherine, the married. They lost their first son when Benteen was 28 years old. Of course, he lost a number of men under his command over the course of the next quarter century, while commanding men in the field, to include the entirety of his beloved Benteen Nine, whether they were injured or wounded or mustered out, they ceased to exist. He struggled with interpersonal relationships and alcohol for the majority of his adulthood. And when we look at Benteen's life experiences, they in many ways they may be looked at as a series of recurring tragedy. A tragic and misunderstood figure who was much maligned, and easily so. But there's no question that Benteen added to kind of the rich tapestry of baseball, and in a couple different ways. We could even consider him somewhat pioneering. He was a member, maybe more than even a member, a club officer of the Cyclone Baseball Club in St. Louis in 1860, which was the first club to take the field, playing the New York rules of baseball in St. Louis. And we also know that it was his team his team after his name that played the first baseball games in the Dakota Territory in 1874. So while he certainly struggled, not unlike many people who've experienced loss and trauma, relationship issues, substance abuse issues, I like in many ways to think that baseball for him, and it seems like the evidence is borne out, that baseball for him was a refuge and something that he absolutely added to over the course of his life and time in the United States military. So. Very interesting character. The baseball aspect of his life is fascinating. Many aspects of his life are fascinating. He's certainly more well known for things other than baseball, but I certainly think he should be more than a footnote in the annals of baseball history. And that wraps it up. Thank you very much for bearing with me, bearing with the technology issues, and for joining us tonight. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, John. There's one comment here, people asking about the slides. I'm going to forward the slides to Jason Pomeranke and have them posted to the 19th Century website. It's a massive file, and it doesn't fit with an email. You just can't attach it. It's I forget how many megabytes, but it's many hundreds of megabytes. So we'll send out a note that they're posted. I have to mail the thumb drive to him so they can get put up on the website. If there's a particular slide you're interested in, I've got a copy. Email me. My email address is on the first page of every newsletter, and I'll be glad to try and pull it out and send it forward to you. Peter, if you'd like to close up for the evening. Let me just apologize for the difficulties, but I thank you for sticking with us.
I'm sure we'll work out some of these glitches that we had in the future. But John, I want to say that you really came up with a fabulous presentation, and it was, I know you said you had done a lot of research and had to really condense it for the thread, but now we got a kind of real wonderful presentation. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much again. All these chats that I'm seeing here right now going on are thanking you, John, for the presentation. And what a great job you did.
Thank you. I guess I appreciate it, and again, thank you for bearing with me through the glitches.
Well, thank us. I had the easy part, Bob, and you had the hard part. Anyway, I want to thank everybody. I want to mention that our next presentation will be next month, November the 2nd, which happens to be November 10th. And the presentation will be by Joanne Holbert. It's How I Miss Tricky Nick. It's 19th century baseball nicknames. A little bit just something about these presentations. All of these are presentations that have been given in the past at the Fred in a more condensed format because of time constraints. So here we have a little bit more luxury to expand on the topic. The presenter can expand on the topic, which John certainly did. Want to say that they, again, keep an eye out for the email that'll come out a week in advance. That'll be a reminder of the presentation. It's titled an abstract of it. And also the day before the presentation will be the link to the Zoom mail.
Good.
Okay. And by the way, Alan, I want to thank you for giving me information about a shirt that I had, Brooklyn versus the world.
Yeah, that's not 19th century though.
Well, thank you, Peter.
I had a T-shirt that I didn't know anything about. Now I know all about it. Thank you.
And let me just, Peter, if Peter and Bob, if it's okay, I'm assuming there were either, I don't know if there were or not, because I couldn't see it doing it this way. But if there were any questions, comments, anything I should or might want to get back to, please feel free to shoot out my email, and I could get back to folks, individually or even as a group, with any questions pertaining to the presentation tonight.
There was one question about where did the name Cyclones come from in the St. Louis? Is there any significance to that?
You know what? The tangent that I could have got off on in terms of the Cyclones and the commercial and the Morning Stars of, in St. Louis in 1859, 60, and 61. That's a whole nother presentation. I don't know the significance of the Cyclone versus the other ones, and I guess I can only say that the reason why Benteen ended up on the Cyclone versus the other clubs is that Griswold and Bradell, both in the glass industry, and Benteen's father in that same field of business, must have come in contact with one another, and that's how come Benteen ended up with the ball playing Cyclones versus one of the other clubs. But I don't know the significance of the name. I'm sure somewhere in Tobias's Sporting News history of St. Louis baseball, it comes up, and we could find it there.
And also,
Thank
I
you
just
very
want,
much.
if I may add, Bob, one other item. After next month, after Joanne's presentation, just to whet your appetites, we have in December, we have Bill Humber doing a presentation on Bob Addy. In January, we have Tom Shiver doing a presentation on the world tour of Spalding in 1888-89. We also have Don Jensen doing a presentation in February about the Hot Dog King. And in March, we have Jerry Casway doing a presentation on Lippman Pike. And more to
We're
come.
all free now to end the session. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you. If you got any questions, comments, please feel free to email me or write it, as they said on Car Talk, write it on the back of a $20 bill and mail it to me. See you all again. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thank you all again.